Well, very simple question. Firstly, do we need a defense? The least we can tell is that we have everyday evidence that we need a defense. The heads of state and government have said defense matters. Are we strong enough? European member states, European nations, certainly not. Are we efficient enough? Certainly not. Then we have to do better. Then you have the traditional question, can we do better with less, more with less? Now I think everybody is convinced, Cathy Ashton said it during the last meeting of defense ministers, we have to do more with more, because more with less is not possible. It's very optimistic, but it will not happen. Then it's more with more on defense. And we have the heads of state and government word on that. Do we have an alternative? That is more difficult as a question. Do we have an alternative to strengthening what we do in a European, let's say, EU framework? Some would say yes, and with some good arguments. The yes can be yes, we have the national alternative, we are sovereign enough. Well, I suppose many persons say it now, particularly during the electoral campaign. We have the bilateral, that's really good, and it functions. And we have NATO. To begin with NATO, I'm as shocked as last year, Julian. But I really think it's a fascinating debate. And I think we share all the same premises. Then afterwards, modalities are so difficult, and giving the proper answer, even an academic or an intellectual answer, is really difficult. Can we say that we can achieve what we want to achieve through a military alliance? NATO, you can refine on it, you can discuss, but it's fundamentally a military alliance between Europe and America, North America. Firstly, I think we can do particularly the defense of Europe, of European territory. We don't consider that we can do it without the transatlantic alliance, for the worst case scenario, without the Americans. And what you said is very impressive about the American way of looking at things, but I think, I hope that nevertheless they don't consider that they could face some challenges not relying on the European ally. Then I think they wish nevertheless to keep a European ally which would remain a solid ally. Then it's not only Europeans desperately looking for the American ally, but also I think the Americans considering that it's nevertheless good to have a strong European ally. But I really think that we cannot do it exclusively. What we want to do as regards our defense and our security, we cannot do it exclusively through the transatlantic alliance, through NATO. Then that's why I said that it's not an alternative, complement certainly, but not an alternative, because of the tilt, how would you say, tilt? The others say pivot, evolution you mentioned.
Rebalancing.
Rebalancing, which is perfectly legitimate, I would say. Then firstly, because of that. Secondly, because everybody says that there is no success coming from pure military action. It has to be a combination of different elements. And to come to the mission of EDA, you cannot develop properly capabilities only from a military point of view. You have to build on the synergies with the civilian aspects. Is the alternative, then for me, NATO is not an alternative. I still don't, even after all our conversations, even in between these sessions here, I don't think that we can merge, because again, for me it would be a paradox and a pity to merge a transatlantic military alliance that we still need, and perhaps for many of our member states more than ever, and a part of the EU instrument, which is CSDP. CSDP is not a standalone policy, it's a policy amongst the other European Union policy. And it has to stay a policy amongst other European Union policy, and then I cannot see how it would be compatible with merging with NATO. But perhaps there's still something I don't understand. I'm sure that you will answer to that. Can the alternative be national? I don't think that anybody seriously believes that the French army, the British army could be the alternative. Bilateral, many people think that it is the best answer, particularly the Franco-British relationship based on the Lancaster House. I remember a question that I asked in a circumstance where French and Brits were there. Could you, as French and Brits, bring to the other Europeans what the Americans bring in NATO? Are you able to provide what is necessary to take action, as they do in Libya, 80% of air-to-air refueling and ISAR and so on? No. Are you ready to do it? Are you able to develop your capabilities to do so? The answer is clearly no. And nevertheless, we have other countries in the European Union ready and looking for the enablers that would allow them to be fully active in defense. Is the alternative regional? Here again, you have more and more people saying that the real cooperation will take place in a regional framework. Here again, yes and no. I think yes, it can be very efficient, and we have proofs every day of the efficiency of regional cooperation. But if you take like-minded countries, like Belgium, Netherlands, Benelux cooperation, very efficient cooperation, but nevertheless, in many cases, I suppose neither Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg consider that they would be enabled through the Benelux cooperation to act by themselves in some very serious cases. Then it's like-minded, this regional cooperation is either with countries of the same size and in many cases smaller countries, then I think it doesn't enable them to cover the different shortfalls that we have. And if it is something else like smaller country with bigger country, I think it would be interesting to discuss it more in depth. Because is it a proper alternative? Don't we recreate kind of zones of influence? First question. Second question, that could be competing between themselves. And second question, are we sure, particularly the smaller countries involved in such a cooperation, sure that the bigger one would really provide the capability when it would be required? And what is the assurance in case that it is badly needed by smaller countries because they are really in a situation where they need this capability and the bigger country cannot have the political green light to do so? Then for me, common security and defense policy, particularly defense policy, cannot be a single policy. Then we have the debate about a single currency or common currency. I think it can certainly not be a single policy. And I'm absolutely convinced that it should not be, but to be something, a common policy that would be compatible with different other policies, I really think so. Second comment that I would like to do, I think the heads of state and government from Maastricht onwards, in spite of many criticism, selected the proper process for going forward. That is a kind of mixture of what we can do in the European Union, the community system and the intergovernmental system. There are many discussions still today. I thought it was slightly anachronic and that now we agree that, well, it's not the community way, it's something that is mixed, but you still have the idea sometimes that, well, progress can only be achieved through the community, traditional community way, initiative, the Commission, role of the European Parliament. And sometimes, even in that kind of conference, you have the question, well, do you think that we should have a commissioner for defense? I really don't think so. I think that we as Patrick said, we don't have a European army, and we don't have a European army because we don't have a European CHOD. And we don't have a European chef des armées. I don't know how to translate it. The political head of the armed forces. Then the day where institutionally we would have the political head of the armed forces and the chief of defense, then yes, we can have I don't know what to commission or what will be the institutional framework. But in the meantime, I think we have to cope with bringing together an intergovernmental approach, which is not purely intergovernmental. It's not like a conference, a peace conference or a negotiation conference. It's, you have, if I take the domain in which we are active capabilities as European Defence Agency, you have a European agency, it's governmental, it's an agency of the Council, Ministers of Defence being the governing board, but you have a structure, a small structure, too small, but not that too small. I think it should be slightly more empowered, including in terms of resources, but not that much. It should remain small to make sure that it will require the interaction with the member states, but nevertheless having a capability of initiative, not institutionally protected initiatives like the Commission has in the community framework, but initiative, making some proposal, and when the governing board has decided to implement what has been decided. Then again, it's not pure intergovernmental. We should not even forget that if some limited decisions are taken by unanimity, most of them can be taken by qualified majority. Then we have, I think, the proper way to go forward, bringing this community model, particularly when it comes to support to industry, to research and technology, the baskets that you mentioned about industry and capabilities, but also, again, the intergovernmental approach, because today, and again, as long as we don't have a CHOD in our institution or a chef des armées, we need to recognize that it's still a national response. The day when we have casualties, again, we won't have the chairman of the commission. You know, we don't have it in NATO either. The person who goes to the funeral when there is a casualty remains a national CHOD, even or the head of state, even when it is a NATO operation. Then the responsibility remains deeply and in public perception. National. Now, when it comes to capabilities, I think it's a good example, I think, of what can today provide the impetus. We don't know exactly where we are regarding the institutional framework. We can have doubts about the strategy or require a new strategy. We know that we need capabilities, and we know what kind of capabilities we need. I think we can always refine, but we know that. And I think that the European Council last December gave, for me, the best impulsion. That is, firstly, to demonstrate the value of what is done in a European framework. Not capabilities, if I may slightly defer to what Patrick said. I don't think we develop capabilities for European foreign policy. You won't build drones or invest in satellites to train Malian soldiers. Or I exaggerate, as always, slightly. But I think we need the capabilities our member states can develop using an EU framework. Mm-hmm. And that is the examples that were given by the heads of state and government. Air-to-air refueling, remotely piloted air systems, drones, to simplify it in some languages, and cyber protection and satellite or space satellite communication. And again, this kind of capabilities, I think, are better developed in a European framework for reasons I could explain afterwards if needed, but again, available for any kind of requirement that you have at home in a NATO framework, in a UN framework, or in a common security or defense mission. Secondly, they have, because persuasion is something very difficult for our defense ministries, they have asked us to come with concrete conditions and incentives to do so, to persuade a CHOD or to persuade a NAD that he has an interest, particularly considering the challenges he faces today, all of them face today, vis-à-vis their resource and the way to perform their mission. They have to find a good, very pragmatic reason to do so in a European framework. That's why the heads of state and government have asked us to work about an efficient policy framework, to work about concrete incentives, including fiscal VAT incentives, and we're also to address the fact that they are never ready together to invest at the same time, and also to make sure that we have kind of discipline when we can agree on a harmonization of the requirement, keep it throughout the life of a program. That's why I like very much the idea that has been mentioned by Sven and you of an architect, and that role could be given to EDA. Then to finish here, I think that we are in a period of strong turbulence, of course, financial, strategic, political turbulence, even kind of anxiety about the European Union itself. I think defense is part of what the European citizens support. It makes sense to have defense at the level of the European Union, but it has to be efficient. And I'm convinced that if, again, we consider that its capabilities and policies develop using the EU framework, but for the purposes of our citizens, for our member states, in any kind of framework that they choose to develop it, it will function. And last point I would like to mention is we won't have defense policy without defense ministers. And I am absolutely convinced that for the time being, we don't have the proper the proper place, the proper role in the European Union for the defense ministers. We won't discuss, you can discuss operation with the foreign affairs minister, defense ministers, and it's good to do so. But you won't discuss capabilities without giving a kind of permanent role and impulsion by the defense ministers and by who represent them, including at the political level in Brussels. Thank you very much.